Ashley. Thank you for having me here today. This has been a great experience. I really want to thank my team for an arousing set of discussions. We went in lots of different directions with this issue. We're talking about technology broadly in this conference, and I think for the academics in the room, the one thing we think about in terms of immediate technological threat in some cases or opportunity in others is this idea that the internet's going to change everything with respect to education. It's our bread and butter all the time. And this is a particularly important issue for a lot of people. I think when we think about the impact of technology on education and ways in which we can measure if it's going to do good things or bad things, we need to remember that when we think about technology specifically, in the absence of data, marketing will prevail. Let me think about the iPad for a second. If you think about the iPad's been hyped for 150 years. If you started lining up in Boston 150 years ago, you would be able to line up for the iPad. And there would be educators that would be predicting that the iPad was going to change everything. If the result of work should at any time be found infelicitous, a sponge will readily banish from the slate all disheartening recollections and leave it free for new attempts. Right? This was hyped as something that was going to change everything, but it certainly wasn't the only thing that was hyped. The technological luminary Edison said that movies were going to change everything. We could take pictures and movies of the best professors in the world, and we could offer people those movies, and that would change everything. The radio was going to change everything. We could, in a massive way, provide education across the airwaves and give people access to information as they needed it so they could learn all sorts of new things. The television was going to change everything. We're going to offer 50 channels of educational television. We're going to wheel television into the classroom, and people can see the best information. This isn't a new concept that technology can change everything. And oftentimes, the hype outlives the actual reality. But there is the possibility that the internet will change everything. Even though we have a constant, steady stream of technologies that have come and gone, and some have stayed, there is the possibility that the internet will, in many ways, be different. Because if we think about the way that the internet actually works, it sort of changes a lot of these other hyped paradigms on their head. The chalkboard, which is a piece of technology, was a way of getting a lot of information to a group of people, but it's really a top-down sort of thing. And when we think about the internet changes everything. When we think about things like the Khan Academy or Coursera or things like OLI, by adding feedback into this loop, by allowing users to now put information back into the system, for allowing people to upload videos, allowing people to tell us about their learning habits, telling us what works and what doesn't. It is possible that the internet will change everything with regard to this problem. But in order for that to happen, what we need to try to figure out is, well, will it, and what's the best way to go about doing that? But there are lots of potential benefits for trying to do this. One of the biggest benefits that was brought up by Nico is that this concept of in-reach. When we're talking about actually trying to do education, we again think about it in this top-down fashion, but what if you can bring people from the community, let's say a retiree who's an engineer for 45 years, bring them back into the learning environment in an online fashion to help out with education. Bring them back to pass along some of those lessons. When you have this feedback loop, these things become possible. We can extend the reach of education. It's a little bit different than television, but maybe not too much, but it's probably a heck of a lot more massive than television was. Increased student success, diversity, we can do just-in-time sorts of things. There's all sorts of potential benefits with these technologies that we should consider. But there are also threats, right? There are also threats. You may not be threatened by Coursera if you're at Stanford or if you're in part of the consortium, but I guarantee you, talking to people up the road at Cal State Long Beach, where in a psychology department they have 25 full-time faculty and 25 lecturers, they are threatened by Coursera. If the university says in a financial exigency of California's budget, we can't afford to pay everyone, but we're just going to go ahead and pay for these courses online, that's a threat, right? So what we need to try to figure out is if these things are going to work, how to make them work efficiently, and more importantly, how to use them to not just get across simple facts, but actually move people further along. So, where are we now? Well, when we think about education, these are the kinds of things we often think about. Bloom's taxonomy, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, these are the things that we think about in higher education. The ability to, at the simple level, remember and know information, and at the more complex level, actually create information, analyze, and do all those sorts of things. But what's really interesting, if you think about preparing people in the academy to go out into the real world, what employers say that they want is often very different. These are the kinds of skills, it's a much longer list, but these are the kinds of skills that are at the top of what employers say they want from psychology graduates, as an example. And I put critical thinking on there, just so you can see where it ranked amongst other things. You know, it's certainly not number one. The ability to work in groups is at the top, right? So when we think about efficacy, the question is really, what do we want to assess? Do we want to assess whether or not people are able to remember facts because they had Khan Academy, or they had some kind of adaptive tutorial and they were able to remember where the brain parts are? Or do we want to assess the kinds of things that employers might be interested in? So when we talk about assessing the efficacy of these technologies, I think what we need to do, and what the group really glommed onto, is come to grips with this fact that efficacy can mean lots of different things to lots of different stakeholders. And we need to be looking at all of those things when we're thinking about the internet. Fact, learning, and skills are certainly there, but we also need to think about engagement, which we're also concerned with in the academy, but also cost, lifelong learning, diversity and access, and preparing for the real world. So how do we get there? Well, one way we need to get there is to figure out what we know right now. And what we don't know right now, yes, there's that file in there. Thank you. While there's a science and learning of technology broadly within the academy, it hasn't been applied as well to commercial products. I say that the evidence that's out there, the data that's out there, is largely absent for us to look at with regard to some of these commercial products. It's probably there, it's definitely there. Whether or not we have access to it is an entirely different question. The other thing we have to think about is in terms of, if we're going to develop a framework for this, if we're actually going to evaluate these kinds of things, we need to think about the future. And the future could look very, very different from the past. So if we think about what education might look like in the future, you know, you want to know about what the future's going to look like, read science fiction or watch science fiction movies. This is what, thank you very much. It's not me, hands up. All right. This is what some people have visualized the future looks like, and some of you may be familiar with this. Am I pressing? No, there we go.
4/3 pi times the radius cubed. 1.26 equals.
What is the dimensionality?
So if you look at the Academy's reaction to this, and by the Academy I mean the Academy of YouTube commenters, you know, they start to, if you think about it, our future framework, they're looking at the kinds of things in the future that we're concerned with today. I kind of like the school, engagement. I think interpersonal interactions would be nice, interactivity. I like the concept, maybe can extend it beyond demographics. Monetization, there's always someone thinking about money, right? The reach and best practice. We should be able to think about these issues for any new technology that comes along. We should develop a framework that can handle these kinds of things. By the way, if you like the Khan Academy, so clearly this person's been to the Khan Academy, so you know that one may survive into the future. So what don't we have right now? What we don't have right now is a framework or a structure for doing these kinds of evaluations, and that's really what we need, and that's the first step. Now, there are examples of this. There is a What Works clearinghouse at the K through 12 level to evaluate different technologies and how effective they are. And so there is a kind of a guidepost for us to look at what can be done. And this uses high-quality research. It makes evaluations and does all the kinds of things that we want. But we don't have that for the technologies that exist today. So the first phase of our proposal is to start building a database of kind of what works, if you will, for these new technologies. But we need to do a lot of things that we're not doing now, which is the ability to scale it up, go across a range of technologies, techniques, education levels, etc. And then once we do that, that lets us do the really interesting stuff. The really interesting stuff is trying to figure out what works, what technology works for a given problem, for a given audience, for a given cost level. What will work for digital natives or lifelong learners. This is where I think the meat is going to come in. But the bottom line is we just don't know yet what we don't know. We need to collect the data, and we need to start building a framework to be able to do that. I think in the end, what we need to know is where we are right now. so that as all these things are coming at us at a quick pace, we can think about where we need to go in the future. Thank you very much.